This is the tale of Treasure Island. It's time for me to answer all these questions and more, since this is ASMR. Aaron, back at it again with another daily video to help you relax. So lay back and enjoy the ride. I hope this read helps you get you through your day, or even better, I hope this video helps you gently fall asleep. I can't wait to get started. Treasure Island, Chapter 1. The old sea dog at the Admiral Benbow. Squire, Trelawney, Dr. Livesley, and the rest of these gentlemen, having asked me to write down the whole particulars about Treasure Island, from the beginning to the end, keeping nothing back but the bearings of the island, and that only because there is still treasure not yet left it. I take upon my pen in the year of grace 17. Go back to the time when my father kept the Admiral Benbow Inn, and the brown old seaman with the sabry cut first took his lodging in the raw roof. I remember him as if it were yesterday, as he came plodding to the inn door, his sea chest following behind him in a hanging barrel. A tall, strong, heavy nut brown man, this tarry pigtail falling under the shoulder of his slow blue coat, his hands ragged and scared with black broken nails, and saber cut across one cheek, and dirty livid white. I remember him looking around the cove and whistling to himself as he did so, and then breaking out of it in the old sea song that he sang so often afterwards. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho, ho, and a bottle of rum. In the high, old, tottering voice that seemed to have been turned and broken at the capstan bars. Then he rapped on the door with a bit of a stick like a handspike that he carried, and when my father appeared, called roughly for a glass of rum. This, when it was brought to him, he drank slowly, like a connoisseur, lingering on the taste and still looking about him at the cliffs of our naval signboard. "This handy cove," says he, at length, and a pleasant cittered grope shop. "Much company, mate?" Father told him no. Very little company. The more was the pity. "Well then," he said, "this is the berth for me. Here you, matey," he cried to the man who trundled to the barrow. "Bring up alongside and help up my chest. I'll stay here a bit," he continued. "I'm a plain man. Rum and bacon and eggs is what I want. And that head up there for to watch ships off. What might call me? They might call me captain. Oh, I see. That you're at there." And he threw down 3 on 4 gold pieces on the threshold. "You can tell me when I've worked through that," says he, looking at it fierce as a commander. And indeed, bad as his clothes were, and coarsely as he spoke, he had none of the appearance of a man who sailed before the mast, but seemed like a mate or skipper, accustomed to be obeyed or to strike. The man who came with the barrow told us the mail had set down the morning before at the Royal George, that he had inquired what inns were along the coast, and hearing ours well spoke, I suppose, and described as lonely, had chosen it from the others for his place of residence, and that was all we could learn of our guest. As a very silent man by custom, all day he hung round the cove or upon the cliffs with a brass telescope. All evening he sat in a corner of the parlor next to the fire and drank the rum and water, very strong. Mostly he would not speak when spoken to, only look up sudden and fierce, and blow through his nose like a foghorn. And when we and the people who come about our house soon learn to let him be. Every day when he came back from the stroll, he asked if any seafaring men had gone by along the road, and at first we thought it was the want of company of his own kind that made him ask the question. But at last we began to see he was desirous to avoid them. When a seaman put up at the Admiral Benbow, as now and then some did, making by coast road for Barstow, he would look in at him through the curtain door before he entered the parlor, and he was always sure to be silent as a mouse when any such was present. For me, at least, there was no secret about the matter, for I was in a way a sharer in his alarms. He had taken me aside one day and promised me a silver fourpenny on the first of every month if I would only keep my weather eye open, a seafaring man with one leg, and let him know the moment he appeared. Often enough, when the first of the month came around and I applied to him for my wage, he would only blow through his nose at me and stare me down. But before the week was out, he was sure to think better of it, bring me my fourpenny piece, and repeat his order to look out for a seafaring man with a leg. How the person haunted my dreams, I need scarcely to tell you. On stormy nights, when the wind shook the four corners of the house, and the surf reared along the cove of up the cliffs, I would see him 1,000 forms, and with 1,000 debacle expressions. Now, the leg would be cut off at the knee, now at the hip, now he was monstrous kind of a creature, who had never had but the one leg, and that in the middle of his body. To see him leap and run, and pressure me over the hedge and ditch was the worst of nightmares. And altogether, I paid a pretty dear for my monthly fourpenny piece, in the shape of the abundant fancies. But though I was terrified by the idea of the seafaring man with one leg, I was far less afraid of the captain himself than anybody else who knew of him. There were nights when he took a deal more rum and water than he would carry, and then he would sometimes sit and sing his wicked old wild sea songs, minded nobody. But sometimes he would call for a glass round and force all the trembling company to listen to his stories, or bear a course of him singing. Often I have heard the house shaking with yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum, all the neighbors joining in for dear life, with fear of death upon them, and each singing louder than the other to avoid remark, for in these fists he was the most overriding companion ever known. He would slap his hand on the table for silence all around. He would fly up in a passion of anger at a question or something, sometimes because none was put, and so he judged the company was not following his story, nor would he allow anyone to leave the inn till he had drank himself sleepy and reeled off to bed. His stories were that frightened the people worst of all, dreadful stories. They were about hanging and walking the plank, in storms at sea, in dry Torgas, in wild deeds and places on the Spanish Main. By his own account, he must have lived his life among some of the wickedest men that God ever allowed upon the sea, and the language in which he told these stories shocked our plain country people almost as much as the crimes that he described. My father was always saying the inn would be ruin for people, would soon cease coming there to be tyrannized over and put down, sent shivering to their bodies. But I really believe his presence did us good. People were frightened at the time, but on looking back, they rather liked it. It was a fine example in a quiet country life, and there was even a party of younger men who pretended to admire him, calling him a true sea dog and a real old salt, and such like names, and saying that there was sort of a man made England terrible at sea. And in one way, indeed, he bade fair to ruin us, for he kept on saying week after week, and at least month after month, so that all the money had been long exhausted, and still my father never plucked up the heart to insist on having more. If ever he mentioned it, the captain blew through his nose so loudly that you might say he roared, and stared my poor father out of the room. I have seen him wringing his hands after such a rebuff, and I am sure the annoyance and the terror he lived must have generally hasted his early and unhappy death. All the time he lived with up the captain made no change whatever in his dress, but so busy some stockings from a hawker. One of the cocks of his hat having fallen down, he let it hang from the day forth. Through it was great annoyance when it blew. I remember the appearance of this coat, which he patched himself upstairs in his room and watched before the end. It was nothing but patches. He never wrote or received a letter, and he never spoke with any but neighbors, and with these, for the most part, only when drunk on rum. The great sea chest none of us had ever seen open. He was only once crossed, and that was towards the end, when my forefather was far gone in a decline that took him off. Dr. Livesey came late one afternoon to see the patient, took a bit of dinner from my mother, and went into the parlor to smoke a pipe until his horse should come down from the hamlet. For we had nothing stabled on the old Ben Bow. I followed him in, and I remember observing the contrast. The neat, bright doctor, with his powder as a white snow, and his bright black eyes and pleasant manners made with colch's country folk, and above all, with that filthy, heavy, bleared scarecrow of a pirate of ours, sitting far gone in rum, with his arms on the table. Suddenly, he, the captain, that is, began to the pipe his external song. 50 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink, and the devil hand done for the rest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. At first, I had supposed the dead man's chest to be that identical big box of his upstairs in the front room, and the thought had been mingled in my nightmares with what of one leg's suffering man. But by this time, we had all long ceased to pay any particular notice to the song. It was new that night to nobody but Dr. Levesley, and on him I observed it did not produce an agreeable effect, for he looked up for a moment quite angrily. Before he went on with his talk to old Taylor, the gardener, on the new cure for the rheumatics. In the meantime, the captain gradually brightened up his own music, and at last flapped his hand upon the table. From him in a way we all knew meant silence. The voices stopped, and at once all but Dr. Levesley. He went on as before, speaking clear and kind, and drew briskly at his own pipe between every word or two. The captain glared at him for a while, flapping his hand again, glared still harder, and at last broke out with a villainous low oath. "Silence, there between decks." "Where are you addressing me, sir?" said the doctor. And when the ruffian had told him with another oath that this was so, "I have only one thing to say to you, sir," replies the doctor, "that if you keep on drinking rum, the world will soon be quite of a very dirty scoundrel." The old fellow's fury was awful. He sprang to his feet, drew and opened a sailor's clasp knife, and balanced it open on the palm of his hand, threatened to pin the doctor to the wall. The doctor never so much as moved. He spoke to him, as before, over his shoulder, and in the same tone, a voice rather high, so that all in the night might hear, but perfectly calm and steady. "If you do not put that knife this instant in your pocket, I promise upon my honor you shall hang at next assizes." Then followed a battle of looks between them, but the captain soon knuckled under, put up his weapon, and resumed his seat, grumbling like a beaten dog. "And now, sir," continued the doctor, "since I now know there's such a fellow in my district, you may count I'll have an eye upon you day and night. I'm not a doctor only, I'm a jester, and if I catch a breath of complaint against you, if it's only for a piece of inconceivably like tonight's, I'll take effectual means to have you hunted down and routed out of this. Let that suffice." Soon after, Dr. Levesley's horse came up to the door, and he rode away, but the captain held his peace that evening, and for many evenings to come. Chapter 2. Black Dog Appears and Disappears. It was not very long after this three occurred. The first of the mysterious events that rid us, at least of the captain, though not, as well as you see, of his affairs. It was a bitter cold winter, with long, hard frosts and heavy gales, and it was plain from the first that my forefather was little likely to see spring. He sank daily, and my mother and I had all the inn upon our hands, and were kept busy enough without paying much regret to our unpleasant guests. It was one January morning, very early, a punching, frosty morning, the cove all gray, with hour frost, the rippling lapping softly on the stones, the sun still low and only touching the hilltops, and shining far to seaward. The captain had risen earlier than usual, and he sat down the beach, his cutlass singing under the broad skirts of the old blue coat, his brass telescope under his arm, his hat tilted back upon his head. I remember his breath hanging like a smoke in his wake as he strode it off, and the last sound I heard of him as he turned the big rock was a loud snort of interrogation, as though his mind was still running upon Dr. Leslie. Well, Mother was upstairs with Father, and I was laying the breakfast table against the captain's return, when the parlor door opened, and a man stepped in, whom I've never set my eyes before. He was pale, tall away creature, wanting 2 fingers of his left hand. Though we wore a cutlass, he did not look much like a fighter. I had always my eyes open for a seafaring man, with 1 leg or 2, and I remember this one puzzled me. He was not sailory, and yet he had a smack of sea about him. I asked him what was for his service, and he said he would take rum, but I was going out of the room to fetch it. He sat down upon the table and motioned me to draw near. I paused where I was, my napkin in my hand. "Come here, Sonny," he says. "Come nearer, here." I took a step nearer. "Is this here table for my mate Bill?" he asked, with a kind of a leer. I told him I did not know his mate Bill, and this was for a person who stayed in our house, whom we called the captain. "Well," he said, "my mate Bill would be called the captain, as like it or not. He had a cut on 1 cheek, and a mighty pleasant way with him, particularly in drink. As my mate Bill will put it, for argument like, that your captain has a cut on 1 cheek, and, well, put it, if you like, that the cheek's the right one. Ah, well, I told you. Now is my mate Bill in this house?" I told him. He was out walking. "Which way, Sonny? Which way has he gone?" And when I pointed out the rock, and I told him how the captain was likely to return, and how soon, and answered a few other questions. "Ah," he said, "this'll be good. As drink to my mate Bill." The expression of his face, as he said those words, was not at all pleasant, and not my own reason for thinking that the stranger was mistaken, even supposing he meant what he said. But it was not an affair of mine, I thought, and besides it was difficult to know what to do. The stranger kept handing about just inside the inn door, peering around the corner like a cat, waiting for a mouse. Once I stepped out myself onto the road, but he immediately called me back, and as I did not obey quick enough for his fancy, a most horrible change came over his tall white face, and he ordered me in with an oath that made me jump. As soon as I was back again, he returned to his former manner, half fawning, half sneering, patting me on the shoulder, told me I was a good boy, and he had taken quite a fancy to me. "I have a son of my own," he said, "as like you as 2 blocks, and he's all the pride of my heart. But the great thing for boys is discipline, Sonny, discipline. Now if you had sailed along of Bill, you wouldn't have stood there to be spoken twice, not you. That was never Bill's way, nor the way of such a sail with him. And here, sure enough, is my mate Bill, with a spy-glass under his arm, blessed. He's old heart, to be sure. You and me, well, just go back into the parlor, Sonny. Get behind the door, and we'll give Bill a little surprise, bless his heart. I say it again. So saying, the stranger backed along with me into the parlor and put me behind him in the corner, so that they were both hidden by the open door. I was very uneasy and alarmed, as you may fancy, and it rather added to my fears to observe that the stranger was certainly frightened upon himself. He cleared the hilt of the cutlass and loosened the blade in his sheath, and all this time we were waiting. There he kept swallowing, as if he felt what he used to call a lump in his throat. At least, and Strode, the captain, slammed the door behind him without looking to the right or left, and marched straight across the room to where the breakfast awaited him. "Bill," said the stranger in a voice that I thought he had tried to make bold and big. The captain spun around on his heel and fronted us. All the brown had gone out of his face, and even his nose was blue. He had the look of a man who's seen a ghost, or the evil one, or something worse, if anything can be. And upon my word, I felt sorry to see him, all in one moment, turn so old and sick. "Come, Bill, you know me. You know an old shipmate, Bill, surely," said the stranger. The captain made a sort of a gasp. "Black Dog," he said. "Who else?" returned the others, getting more at ease. "Black Dog as ever was, come forward to see his old shipmate Billy, at the Admiral Benbow Inn." "Ah, Bill, Bill, we have seen a sight of times, us two, since I lost them to Tollins," holding up his molted hand. "Now look here," said the captain. "You run me down. Here I am." "Well then, speak up. What is it?" "That's you, Bill," returned Black Dog. "You are right of it, Bill. I'll have a glass of rum from this dear child here, as I've took such a liking to, and we'll sit down, if you please, and talk square, like old shipmates." When I returned with the rum, they were already seated on either side the captain's breakfast table. Black Dog next to the door, sitting sideways so as to have one eye on his old shipmate, and one, as I thought, on his retreat. He bade me go and leave the door wide open. "None of your keyholes for me, Sonny," he said, and I left them together. Retired into the bar. For a long time, I thought I certainly did my best to listen. I could hear nothing but a low gambling. But at least the voices began to grow higher, and I could pick up a word or two, mostly oaths from the captain. "No, no, no, no. And an end of it," he cried. And again, "If it comes to swinging, swing all, say I." Then, all of a sudden, there was a tremendous explosion of oaths and other noises. The chair and the table went over in a lump. A clash of steel followed, and then a cry of pain, and the next instant I saw Black Dog in full flight, and the captain hotly pursuing, both with drawn cutlass, and the former streaming blood from the left shoulder. Just at the door, the captain aimed at the fugitive one last tremendous cut, which would certainly have split him to the chin, had it been intercepted by our big signboard of Admiral Benbow. You may see this notch on the lower side of the frame in this day. The blow was the last of the battle. Once out upon the road, Black Dog, in spite of his wound, showed a wonderful clean pair of heels, and disappeared over the edge of the hill. Half a minute. The captain, for his part, stood staring at the signboard like a bewildered man. When he passed his hand over his eyes several times, and at last turned back into the house. "Jim," says he, "rum." And as he spoke, he reeled a little and caught himself with one hand against the wall. "Are you hurt?" I cried. "Rum," he repeated. "I must get away from here. Rum, rum." I ran to fetch it, but I was quite unsteadied by all that fallen out, and I broke one glass and folded the trap. And while I still getting in my way, I heard a loud fall in the parlor, and running in, beheld the captain lying full length upon the floor. At the same instant, my mother, alarmed by the cries and fighting, came running downstairs to help me. Between us, he raised his head. He was breathing very loudly and hard, but his eyes were closed, and his face a horrible color. "Dear, dearie me," cried my mother. "What a disgrace upon the house, and your poor father sick." And in the meantime, we had no idea what to do to help the captain, nor any other thought but that he had got his death hurt in the scuffle with the stranger. I got the rum, to be sure, and tried to put it down his throat, but his teeth were tightly shut, and his jaws were strong as iron. It was a happy relief for us when the door opened and Dr. Lively came in on his visit to my father. "Oh, doctor," we cried, "what shall we do? Where is he wounded?" "Wounded? A fiddlestick's end," said the doctor. "No more wounded than you or I. The man has had a stroke, as I warned him. Now, Mr. Hawkins, just you run upstairs to your husband and tell him, if possible, nothing about it. For my part, I must do my best to save his fellow terrible, worthless life. And Jim here won't get me basin." When I got back with basin, the doctor had already ripped up the captain's sleeve and exposed his great sinewy arm. It was tattooed in several places. Here's my luck. A fair wind and Billy Bones' fancy were very neatly and clearly executed on the forearm, and up near the shoulder was a sketch of gallows, and a man hanging from it, done, as I thought, as the Great Spirit. "Prophetic," said the doctor, touching the picture with his finger. "And now, Master Billy Bones, if that be your name, you'll have a look at the color of your blood." "Jim," he said, "are you afraid of blood?" "No, sir," said I. "Well then," he said, you hold the basin." And with that, he took his lancer and opened a vein. A great deal of blood was taken before the captain opened his eyes and looked messily about him. First, he recognized the doctor with an unmistakable frown. Then, his glance fell upon me, and he looked revealed. But suddenly, his color changed, and he tried to raise himself, crying, "Where's Black Dog?" "There is no Black Dog here," said the doctor, "except what you have on your own back. You have been drinking rum. You have had a stroke, precisely as I told you, and I have just very much against my own will dragged you head foremost out of the grave. Now, Mr. Bones, that's not my name," he interpreted. interrupted. Much I care, returned the doctor. It's the name of the buccaneer of my acquaintance, and I call you by it for the sake of shortness. And what I have to say to you is this. One glass of rum won't kill you, but if you take one, you'll take another, and another, and I stake my wig if you don't break off short, you'll die. Do you understand? Die. Go to your own place, like the men in the Bible. Come now. Make an effort. I'll help you. To your bed for once. Between us, with much trouble, we managed to hoist him upstairs and laid him on his bed, where his head fell back on the pillow, if he were almost fainting. Now mind you, said the doctor, I clear my conscience. The name of rum for you is death. And with that, he went off to see my father, taking me with him by the arm. This is nothing, he said, as soon as he had closed the door. I have drowned blood enough to keep him quiet a while. He should lie for a week where he is. That is the best thing for him. You but another stroke would settle